Hello again, and thanks for clicking on my video. This is a demo that I did in class recently. It's a small painting, 11 by 15, and I thought it'd be a good one to show. There's a lot of sunlight in this painting, a lot of light effect, and so we'll go through this. For the color mixing, I've just been picking up the palette and putting it on top of the painting. I think that's a little easier than setting up a second camera. And what you'll notice in this painting, and in often a lot of my demos, if you've looked at some of the other paintings, is that it's really important to get those brighter, intense colors in first. And so that really dictates what I do first. It's not necessarily moving from back to front. It really is dictated by what colors need to be on white paper, meaning there's nothing else underneath that. These are pure, clean colors. They're not, neutrals. They're not grays. They're not earth tones generally, unless, like in this case, the earth tone is a mixture, but it still kind of leans towards the orange. And the approach here is also, in some of my other demos that I've shown, it's, I'm very wet, pre-wet the paper and big washes. In this case, because there is so many edges and so much contrast between shapes that it didn't seem to make sense to go in and flood the paper with lots of color and lots of soft. I could have, but I wanted to really retain as much of the white paper as I could because of this really strong light. And so working dry with a smaller brush and just indicating these little sort of jewel tones that appear in all the different areas in the painting, and doing that first, I think, is really important to establish those sunlit colors early on. This is my standard violet, and you see, if you've watched some of the other videos, I use that over and over again. But occasionally you'll see me, I'll go and pick up a little bit of Pyrrole Scarlet and put it on the side. Because Pyrrole Scarlet's a little bit warmer and has a little bit closer to the yellow side, it creates a more muted, since yellow is a complement of violet, it creates a more muted violet. And so sometimes I'll maintain the real strong violet, but I also have that little bit of a muted section. And so, when you're mixing your colors, instead of just mixing that one mix, look for that variety. And so you see that it ranges from violet to blue, and actually some different blues. By adding some of that manganese towards the end, gives me a little bit of a cooler blue to mix with the cobalt and ultramarine. And so that gives you that variety. This painting's interesting in that I didn't follow my drawing real closely right there, and I extended the shadows down further down this path, and I'm not sure why I did that, but you'll see later in the video how we take care of that. And I didn't even notice it until I put it up, and my class, we just sat around and we were looking at it, and that's the beauty of doing a painting in a class and a group of people, and we can critique each other's work, and we were all commenting that the shadows are bigger than they appear in the reference, and why did I do that? And I really didn't have an answer for him. I don't know why I did that. Not paying attention, I suppose. And so this painting uses a pretty full palette, except for a lot of, like, at the top of the palette you see where raw umber is. Those are mostly there's shadow violet and rose of ultramarine. There's another violet up there, and I don't really go into any of those. But other than that, it's using pretty much the whole range of my colors. There I'm getting that real dark. When I need to go really dark, that indanthrene blue and raw umber will do that for me. It gives me that really deep, almost a black. But again, this is a lot of reverse painting, and I'm being kind of conservative too, placing it. I'm trying to leave areas of white. I'm trying to make sure that I don't, you know, overpaint some of those nice colors that I put in at the very beginning of the painting. Um, and again, switching back and forth, adding, you know, this is a sort of a real deep rusty brown going to almost a black, and then switching over to like a blue violet, constantly trying to get some of that variety that's in there. I really liked how that blue, when I put that in that along the back shore of the stream, how that pushes back. That gives you a little sense of distance. The drawing was pretty complete. I kind of obliterated it really fast. I'm not sure, you know, maybe because I was in a class situation, I was talking to my students as I'm painting, but pretty quickly I lost some of my drawing along the foreground shore and up around those trees. I had to sort of do a little inventing. Again, this is a connecting shape. The shoreline value is the same as the water, so you do those shapes together. And so we come right down, and again, lots of variety within that water. We go from that warm, which is that quinacridone burnt orange mixture, right into that real deep dark. That's that indanthrene blue and raw umber. And there's quin red with that quin burnt orange, and that gives you that kind of a deep, almost grayed violet. And so it's just, you know, picking my spots. There's very little pre-wetting. The only time I put a little bit of extra water on the surface was the path when I put those shadows in. There was a little bit of dampness there, but everything else is just painted on dry paper. So this is where I kind of lost some of my drawing. I remember as I'm doing it, just sort of, I had to slow down and start to look and say, okay, what are these shapes? I had them drawn in there, but I kind of just blew through that really quickly. And again, the path that you're looking at is packed snow, and it really is ice. It was absolutely treacherous. It's a popular place to walk in Mill Creek Park, which is a park near where I live, and it was beautiful. That's what caught my eye, was that light just, you know, really glaring off of that ice, and then that reflection on the water. It just begged to be painted. But that's the reason that it's so white and so bright. So again, back to these really dark darks, and you notice these aren't real watery. I was trying to, I don't want to layer too much. If I know it's dark, this paper, it's Waterford rough, and I don't use Waterford rough that often. I have some, and I thought it would be a good choice considering that I was going to paint fairly dry, which meant that I would probably have a lot of broken edges, and so a rougher paper would seem to make more sense for that, to get sort of dry brush edges. But there's not a lot of water in these mixes, so that the paint goes on fairly directly, and I don't have to worry about putting, you know, too many layers down. The other reason, the previous one of my other demos, I did a lot of layering. The paper was different, and it seemed to make sense for that. In this case, because there's so many small shapes up against one another, if I have to go back and layer and layer and layer, I'm gonna start losing my shapes. You know, they're gonna start overlapping. All those layers are gonna overlap. And so in this case, that's why there's not a lot of water when I start to get into these darks. I want to be very direct about it and just get in there and put them in. And I need to see that contrast between that real bright sunlit foliage and those deeper shadows. And so that's what this process is, and we're all over the place as far as color is concerned. You know, we go from almost a deep blue to a black to a deep violet to a phthalo green mixture, which is these hemlock trees along the shoreline. So there you see that range of dark, from a real deep, almost brown violet, to a blue green. So the one thing that you don't see in these videos, because they are compressed, is that, that original color that I mixed up, I went through that really quickly because there wasn't a lot of water there, and so I had to go back and remix. And that's important, just because you think you mix up a lot, it does go away really quickly. So during the process, just continue to pour more color onto your palette, so that you always are pulling from that nice juicy mixture, and that keeps your colors from graying down. Because if you're stretching it out, if you're really trying to get the last bit of color off of that palette, you're probably not loading the brush quite the way that you should be. And so it's important to go back and to reinforce all of those mixtures. And you can't do that without fresh paint on your palette. And so that's always a must, is make sure that you got plenty of paint to pull from. So this painting went fairly quickly. It's pretty straightforward. It's a very high contrast image, and the key was just really maintaining those light shapes. I scratched in a little bit, and that's a timing. When you first put the color on, you can't do that. You got to wait till it's almost dry, and then you can scratch in a little bit of a tree or a tree limb or something like that. The between layers, if I had to, I did blow dry it, I think maybe 3 times or 4 times during the process, to make sure that, if I needed an edge, I made sure that the paper was really dry. That far edge of those, that it's like a bush that's along the shore, and it's that kind of brownish color. It had to be knocked down in value, so there wasn't too much of a contrast shape with the far right dark value in the background. And so that was really an important thing. I had to go back and hit that a couple times to try to knock that back enough. This is the tree, the bush, the limb in front of the tree, of the highlight area, where the glare is hitting the water. You notice that it changes. I've switched to like almost an orange as it comes across, and that really is that effect of the light sort of bending around it, which will affect its value. And so it feels like there's really strong light behind that object. You can see it there. I just left that middle part a little bit on the orange side, so it felt like the sun was really coming through there and bending around that. So I've gone back. This will be the 3rd pass on those shadows, trying to just keep incrementally moving them darker and darker to try to get them to the proper value. On watercolor, everything we put down at first, it's on white paper, it looks plenty dark enough, and so sometimes we underestimate, and we also lose some value as it dries. And so there's another example of that. So this is, I had mentioned in a previous video, with taking the white gouache. I do use gouache often at the end of my paintings for accenting, and I said, you got to be careful with it. You can't try to fix something. And in this example, I think I was trying to fix those shadows, and I went back with some gouache mixed up with a little bit of the Quin red, and I wanted that kind of it's not quite purely white paper showing, but has a little bit of warmth. And I went in that pathway and I did that. And I didn't like how it looked. Some of the other little accents that I'm putting in now, like the reflections, that's fine. They look great. I love the broken edges, and some of the things up in the trees and stuff, that was fine. But I wasn't real happy with the pathway. And so I went forward and tried to put in these little other accents with the idea that something's got to give on these shadows, because it really wasn't. It looked heavy, it looked kind of muddled. And so, my first attempt here is just, let's remove the gouache that I put on. And so I'm using a wet brush just with water and a tissue, and go back and reactivate all that gouache and then try to lift that back off, because that was not a great idea to have it on there that strong. There's going to be obviously some residual gouache that's on there, and that's okay, but I didn't like the heaviness of it, and so that's why I'm in here now just trying to correct that and pull it back a little bit. And you can only take off so much with the water and the brush, but at least that's a little bit better, not quite as heavy. So what I did is I dried it really well and then used a magic eraser, which I'm showing right now. And I went and I lifted off all of that. A magic eraser is made by Mr. Clean. It's what you use to clean the tub or in your bathroom. And if you've never used it, it's really great. It'll remove watercolor paint from paper without damaging the paper. The key is, though, you have to dry the paper completely. It has to be bone dry. And you have to wet the sponge, get all the excess water off of it, and you have to rub aggressively. It's kind of hard to actually make yourself rub your paper that hard, but you won't damage the paper unless the paper's a little bit damp, and it could damage it. And then I went back and I'm just sort of, bringing in some of these other little accents and just leaving that bright glare on that ice just the way it is. And I was much happier with that. I thought the effect was much better, and I was glad to get rid of the gouache and also pull back on that shadow so it didn't come down quite as far. The last thing that I did was to take a razor blade and go in and just start pulling up those little sparkles on the water, any little piece that was catching some light. So that was on the water surface, up in the trees, that bush that's right by the water there, any little leaves, and just really dug in. Had to dig pretty hard sometimes to get to the white of the paper. And there you see it. It's kind of just all over these little sparkly places. So I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and please subscribe and share this video. And I hope that you tune in to my next video. Thanks.